I never thought a basket of bread rolls would be the moment I finally snapped. But there I was, watching my family humiliate my son in a fancy restaurant, and something inside me just broke. Let me back up. My name is Linda, and for 32 years, I'd been the family doormat, the responsible one. The one who always said yes when my little sister Jill needed money, when my parents needed help, when anyone in the family had a problem. I was the fixer, the giver, the one who sacrificed everything to keep everyone else happy. And what did I get in return? Nothing but contempt disguised as family obligation. It all came to a head 3 months ago at Bella Notte, this upscale Italian restaurant in downtown Chicago. I'd saved for weeks to treat my family to a nice dinner. My son Mason had just turned 12, and I wanted him to feel special, to have one evening where he felt like he belonged to a family that actually cared about him. I should have known better. The moment we walked through those heavy oak doors, I felt it. That familiar tension in my shoulders, the tightness in my chest that always appeared when I was around my family. Mason squeezed my hand, his way of telling me he felt it too. He was such a perceptive kid, always reading the room, always trying to make himself smaller so he wouldn't be a burden. It killed me. Jill was already seated at the table with her husband Doug and their 3 kids. My parents sat at the head of the table, dressed to the nines like they were attending some society gala. The moment Mason and I approached, I saw Jill's eyes rake over my son's outfit. He was wearing his best clothes, a button-down shirt I'd ironed that morning and his nicest jeans. To me, he looked handsome and put together. But Jill's lip curled. "Oh, Linda," she said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "You actually brought him here dressed like that? Those country clothes don't really fit a place this elegant, do they?" My mother laughed, actually laughed, like it was the funniest joke she'd heard all week. My father just shook his head with this disappointed expression I'd seen my entire life. Mason's face went red, and he tried to pull away from me, but I held his hand tighter. "His clothes are perfectly fine," I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. "If you say so," Jill sang, turning back to her menu. "Anyway, we already ordered. Hope you don't mind. We were starving." I looked at the table. They'd ordered everything. Appetizers, expensive bottles of wine, the seafood tower, premium steaks. My heart sank as I did the quick math in my head. This was going to cost me way more than I'd budgeted, but I said nothing. I always said nothing. The waiter appeared, a young man with slicked back hair and a professional smile. "Are you ready to order, ma'am?" "Yes," I said, reaching for Mason's menu. "My son would like." "Actually," my father interrupted, his voice cold and dismissive. "We're not ordering for him. There's a bread basket right there. That should be plenty for a child." The waiter looked uncomfortable. Mason's hand trembled in mine. And Jill, God, Jill had this satisfied smirk on her face like she'd just won some game I didn't even know we were playing. "We don't order food for your son," my mother added, pushing the bread basket toward Mason. "You should have fed him before you came if you were worried about it." Something inside me cracked, not broke, cracked, like ice on a frozen lake, spiderwebbing outward in every direction. I looked at my son, at his humiliated face, at the way he was trying so hard not to cry. I looked at my sister, practically glowing with malicious pleasure. I looked at my parents, these people who were supposed to love me, supposed to protect me, sitting there like I was nothing more than an inconvenience. And I was done. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. Every eye at the table turned to me. I smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "Waiter," I said calmly, "cancel everything at this table, every single item they ordered." "Excuse me?" Jill sputtered. "You heard me. Cancel it all. And please bring me your most expensive ribeye steak dinner, medium rare, with all the sides." "For my son." "Linda," my father started, his face turning red. "Don't you dare." "Oh, but I dare," I said, my voice getting stronger with each word. "You want to teach my son about his place? Fine, let me teach you about yours. I've been paying your bills for years, Jill. Your rent, your car payments, your kids' school supplies. Mom, Dad, that trip to Florida last year? That was my money. The new roof on your house? Me. The lawyer fees when Jill got sued for that credit card debt? Also me." The table had gone silent. Other diners were starting to notice. "So here's what's going to happen," I continued. "I'm ordering my son the best meal in this restaurant. And as for your bill, Father, I'm having the waiter transfer it to your name, since apparently my money has always been your money anyway." "You ungrateful little," my mother started. "No," I cut her off. "I'm done being grateful for being treated like garbage. Waiter, please process that order." The young man nodded quickly, clearly relieved to escape the tension. I turned to Mason. "Come on, baby, let's go sit at that nice table by the window. Just you and me." As we walked away, I heard chaos erupting behind us. Doug was choking on something, Jill was shrieking about how I'd humiliated them, and my parents were sputtering threats and insults. I didn't care. For the first time in my life, I didn't care. But then Jill made a mistake. As I was guiding Mason toward our new table, she rushed up behind me and grabbed my arm hard enough to leave marks. "You're going to regret this," she hissed in my ear. "I'll make you regret this." I turned to look at her. Really look at her. This woman who I'd supported, defended, and loved for 3 decades, and all I saw was a stranger, someone who had never once considered me family. "No," I said quietly. "You're going to regret this. Because I'm done. With all of you." I pulled my arm free and noticed Uncle Gary and Aunt Denise sitting at a nearby table. They'd witnessed the entire thing. Uncle Gary, my father's younger brother, had never gotten along with my parents. Aunt Denise gave me a small nod of approval and something that might have been pride in her eyes. At least someone in this family had some sense. Mason and I ate our meal in peace by the window. I watched him cut into his steak, saw the way his face lit up at the taste. This was what mattered. Not my parents' approval, not Jill's manipulation, not any of it. Just this moment with my son. But as we were leaving, I accidentally bumped into a dessert cart. The whole thing toppled over with a spectacular crash, sending plates and glasses shattering across the marble floor. The sound echoed through the restaurant like thunder. "Oops," I said flatly, not bothering to sound apologetic. I left a generous tip for the waiter, took Mason's hand, and walked out into the cool Chicago night. My phone started buzzing before we even reached the car. Calls, texts, voicemails, all flooding in at once. Jill calling me every name in the book, demanding I pay for the entire dinner. My mother sending long text messages about family loyalty and respect. My father leaving voicemails about how I'd disgraced them publicly and owed them an apology and financial compensation. I turned off my phone and drove home in silence. Mason fell asleep in the passenger seat, his head resting against the window. When we got home, I carried him inside, even though he was getting too big for it, tucked him into bed, and kissed his forehead. Then I went to my room and did something I hadn't done since I was a child. I cried. Really cried. Years of suppressed pain and anger and disappointment came pouring out. But mixed in with the grief was something else. Something I hadn't felt in a long time. Relief. The next morning, I woke up to find my phone completely dead from all the notifications. When I charged it and turned it back on, there were 73 missed calls, over 100 text messages, and countless voicemails. I didn't listen to a single one. Instead, I called Chloe, my best friend from college. Chloe was a lawyer now, sharp as a knife, and twice as dangerous when she needed to be. We'd stayed close over the years, but I'd always been too embarrassed to tell her the full extent of how my family treated me. "Not anymore, Chloe," I said when she answered. "I need your help, and I need you to know that I'm ready to fight." There was a pause, then I heard the smile in her voice. "Finally, tell me everything." We met at a coffee shop downtown that afternoon. I brought everything. Years of bank statements showing the money I'd sent Jill. Screenshots of text messages where she'd guilted me into paying for things. Emails from my parents demanding money for various expenses. Receipts, records, everything I could find. Chloe spread it all out on the table, her sharp eyes scanning each document. "Jesus, Linda," she said finally. "You've given them over $50,000 in the last 5 years alone." The number hit me like a punch to the gut. $50,000. Money I could have saved for Mason's college fund. Money I could have used to buy us a better house, take us on vacations, give us a better life. "They're going to come after you hard," Chloe warned. "Your family doesn't like losing control. Are you ready for that?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. "I'm done being their doormat. I want them to pay for what they've done, not just to me, but to Mason." Chloe nodded slowly. "Okay then, let's build your case." The first strike came 3 days later. My parents and Jill showed up at my house unannounced, pounding on the door hard enough that my neighbors came out to watch. I'd been expecting this, so I'd already called Uncle Gary and Aunt Denise to be there as witnesses. I opened the door to find my father's face purple with rage, my mother looking like she'd been crying for days, and Jill wearing this expression of victimized innocence that made me want to laugh. "You owe us $1,000, my father announced without preamble, "for the dinner you ruined and the embarrassment you caused." "I don't owe you anything," I said calmly. "You're the ones who decided to order expensive food you couldn't afford." "We wouldn't have ordered if we'd known you were going to throw a tantrum like a child," my mother snapped. "You invited us to that dinner, Linda. The bill is your responsibility." "Actually," Chloe's voice came from behind me. She'd been waiting in the living room. "Linda invited you to dinner. She didn't authorize you to order half the menu without consulting her. That's not how invitations work, legally speaking." My parents' eyes widened when they saw Chloe in her perfectly tailored suit, her briefcase in hand, looking every inch the successful attorney she was. "Who is this?" Jill demanded. "This is my lawyer," I said simply. "And she has some interesting things to show you." We moved into the living room where I'd already set up my laptop. Uncle Gary and Aunt Denise sat on the couch, their presence a silent show of support. Chloe opened a folder and began pulling out documents. "This is a record of every payment Linda has made to you over the past 5 years, Jill. Chloe said professionally. $52,347 to be exact. Rent payments, car payments, credit card payments, grocery money, and various other expenses. Jill's face went white. And these, Chloe continued, pulling out more papers, are text messages where you guilted Linda into making these payments by lying about Doug being sick, about your kids going hungry, about being evicted. Meanwhile, Linda has photos you posted on Facebook showing you at expensive restaurants, wearing designer clothes, taking weekend trips to Miami. That's different, Jill stammered. That was fraud, Chloe finished. What you did is called financial fraud, obtaining money under false pretenses. My mother stood up shakily. This is ridiculous. Linda gave that money freely. We're family. Mom, I said, and my voice was ice cold. When was the last time you gave me anything? When was the last time you supported me? When was the last time you even asked how I was doing? Silence. That's what I thought, I said. Aunt Denise, would you like to remind everyone what you told me last week? Aunt Denise stood up, and I'd never seen her look more fierce. For the past 10 years, I've watched you people use Linda like an ATM machine. I've watched you dismiss her accomplishments, ignore her struggles, and treat her son like he doesn't exist. Every family gathering, every holiday, you people take and take and take, and Linda just gives because that's who she is. Well, I'm done watching it. She walked over to my mother. Do you remember Linda's college graduation? When she graduated summa cum laude with her engineering degree? None of you came. You were all too busy celebrating Jill's engagement to a man who you knew was bad news. Do you remember when Linda bought her first house? She invited you to the housewarming party. You didn't show up. But when Jill needed help moving into her 5th rental because she kept getting evicted, Linda was there every single time. My father tried to interrupt, but Uncle Gary stood up and the look on his face stopped him cold. You want to know something interesting? Uncle Gary said. I did some digging. Talked to some family members. Turns out Linda isn't the only person you've used. Cousin Marie? She lent Jill $8,000 3 years ago that was never repaid. Uncle Tom? He co-signed on a car loan for Jill that defaulted and ruined his credit. Aunt Patricia? She let Jill stay with her rent-free for 6 months, and Jill repaid her by stealing jewelry and selling it. Jill jumped to her feet. That's a lie. You can't prove any of that. Actually, I can, Uncle Gary said mildly, pulling out his phone. They all sent me evidence. Seems like once word got out that Linda was finally standing up to you, everyone wanted to share their stories. The room fell silent except for Doug's nervous coughing. I pulled out an envelope from my bag and slid it across the coffee table. Here's $500, I said. That's all you're getting from me. Not because I owe it to you, but because I want you to know that this is the last penny you'll ever see from me. Consider it a gift. A goodbye gift. Linda, my mother started, her voice breaking. You can't do this. We're your family. No, I said, standing up. Family doesn't treat each other the way you've treated me. Family doesn't use each other. Family doesn't publicly humiliate each other's children. You're not my family anymore. You're just people I used to know. My father's face went from purple to almost black with rage. You ungrateful little. Get out, I said, my voice cutting through his words like a blade. This is my house, my home, and you're not welcome here anymore. Any of you. If you contact me again, if you come to my house, if you try to speak to Mason, I will file for a restraining order. You can't tell us we can't see our grandson, my mother shrieked. Watch me, I said. You've never acted like he was your grandson before. Why start now? They left eventually, but not before my father threw the envelope of money back at me, and Jill screamed that I'd regret this. I locked the door behind them and leaned against it, my whole body shaking. You did good, Chloe said, squeezing my shoulder. But you know this isn't over, right? I know, I said. Let them come. They came all right, just not the way I expected. 2 days later, the attack started on social media. Jill posted a long, carefully worded status about how some people forget their family obligations and turn their backs on the people who raised them. She didn't mention my name, but everyone knew who she was talking about. My mother posted photos of family gatherings from years ago, conveniently cropping me out of most of them, with captions about how precious family is and how heartbroken she was when family members chose material things over love. It was a calculated campaign to make me look like the villain, and it worked on some people. I got messages from distant relatives telling me I should apologize, that family is everything, that I was being selfish. But Chloe had prepared me for this. We'd already set up a plan. Instead of responding directly, Chloe helped me create an anonymous account on a popular parenting forum. I posted my story there, every detail, every receipt, every screenshot. I titled it, My Sister Used Me as an ATM for Years and My Parents Enabled Her. Am I wrong for cutting them off? The response was overwhelming. Hundreds of comments poured in within hours, almost all of them supporting me. People shared their own stories of toxic family members. They validated my feelings. They told me I'd done the right thing. And then something unexpected happened. A woman named Sarah sent me a private message through the forum. I used to work with someone named Jill a few years ago. The message read, "If it's the same person, you need to know what she did to our team. She sabotaged a coworker's project to make herself look good, lied about a colleague to get her fired, and was eventually let go for creating a hostile work environment. I have emails and documents if you need them. I'm so sorry you've had to deal with her." I stared at the message for a long time. Then I replied, asking for details. Sarah sent me everything. Emails showing Jill taking credit for others' work, complaints from coworkers, records of her being terminated for cause, and photos. Photos of Jill at expensive restaurants, at beach resorts, at spa days. All during the time she was telling me Doug was sick and they were about to be evicted and needed money desperately. I saved everything. The next blow came a week later. I was at work when I got a call from Mason's school. My heart stopped. "Miss Linda," the principal said carefully, "we've had a visit from Child Protective Services. There's been a report made about Mason's care." I went numb. What? Someone filed an anonymous report claiming that Mason is being neglected, that he's underfed and improperly clothed. Of course, we told them this is absolutely not true. Mason is one of our best students, always well cared for, but they still need to do a home visit. It's protocol. I knew immediately who had filed the report. I thanked the principal and called Chloe. "They're escalating," Chloe said grimly. "This is a common tactic in family disputes. They're trying to use the system to harass you. Don't worry, your house is clean, Mason is obviously well cared for, and you have documentation of everything. Just cooperate fully and be honest." The CPS worker came the next day. She was a tired-looking woman in her 40s who seemed apologetic about the whole thing. She walked through my house, checked the fridge, looked at Mason's room, asked him questions privately. When she was done, she sat down with me at the kitchen table. "Miss Linda," she said gently, "this report was clearly malicious. Your son is happy, healthy, and obviously loved. I'm closing this case immediately. However, I have to ask, do you know who might have filed this report?" "I have suspicions," I said carefully. "My family and I are currently in a dispute." She nodded knowingly. "I see this a lot. Family members weaponizing the system against each other. For what it's worth, I'm sorry you're going through this. If you need to file a complaint about the false report, you have that right." After she left, I called Chloe back. "Can we find out who made the report?" "I can try," she said. "I have some contacts who might be able to help. Give me a few days." It took less than that. Chloe called me 2 days later, and I could hear the anger in her usually controlled voice. "The report was filed from Jill's IP address," she said. "I have proof. Linda, they filed a false report with CPS. That's a crime. We can press charges." Something cold and hard settled in my chest. They'd tried to take my son away from me. They'd used the system, a system meant to protect children, as a weapon. Because I dared to stand up for myself. "Chloe," I said quietly, "I want to destroy them." There was a pause. Then Chloe said, "Let me draft something. We're going to hit them with everything." The cease and desist letter arrived at my parents' house, Jill's house, and Doug's workplace 3 days later. It was a masterpiece. Chloe had outlined every instance of harassment, every false claim, every act of fraud. She'd attached copies of bank statements, text messages, social media posts, and the CPS report. The letter demanded they immediately cease all contact with me and Mason, stop posting about us on social media, and warned that any further harassment would result in immediate legal action, including criminal charges for filing a false CPS report and civil suits for defamation and emotional distress. The response was immediate. Doug called me that night, his voice shaking. "Linda," he said, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't know Jill filed that CPS report. I swear I didn't know. I've transferred half of the rent money we owe you. It's all I have right now. I've moved out. I can't do this anymore." I was surprised by the genuine remorse in his voice. "Doug, what's going on?" "Jill has been lying to me too," he said, and I could hear him crying. "She's been taking money from our joint savings account, thousands of dollars. I thought we were broke, but she's been spending it all on herself. Designer clothes, expensive trips with her friends, spa treatments. And the CPS thing, when I found out she did that, I just couldn't anymore. What kind of person tries to get a kid taken away from his mother?" We talked for another hour. Doug told me everything. How Jill had been manipulating him for years, how she'd isolated him from his own family, how she'd been emotionally abusive and controlling. He said he'd been afraid to leave because she'd threatened to take his kids away and make sure he never saw them again. "I'll testify," he said finally. "If you need me to, about everything Jill and your parents have done, I'll tell the truth. It's the least I can do." After we hung up, I sat in the dark living room for a long time. This was bigger than I'd thought. Jill hadn't just been using me. She'd been using everyone around her, destroying lives without a second thought. It was time to end this. With Chloe's help, I created something I called the Family Betrayal Files. It was a private website, password protected, containing everything. Every receipt, every text message, every email, every piece of evidence of Jill and my parents' behavior. I included Sarah's testimony about Jill's workplace misconduct, Doug's statement about the financial fraud and emotional abuse, bank statements showing the $50,000 I'd given them, and documentation of the false CPS report. Then I sent the link to everyone who mattered. Extended family members, my parents' friends, Jill's coworkers, neighbors, everyone in our community who'd been fed their version of events. I didn't write a long explanation, just a simple message. This is the truth about what happened. Make your own judgment. The fallout was spectacular. Aunt Patricia called me crying, apologizing for believing Jill's lies about the stolen jewelry. Cousin Marie reached out to thank me for exposing Jill's pattern of financial fraud. Uncle Tom said he wished he'd seen the site years ago before Jill ruined his credit. But the biggest impact was at Jill's workplace. Apparently, several people there had suspected Jill of unethical behavior, but never had proof. Now they did. She was fired within a week, escorted out of the building with her belongings in a box. My parents' social circle turned on them too. These were people who valued reputation above everything, and now everyone knew the truth. They'd favored one daughter so blatantly that they'd driven the other away. They'd enabled fraud, harassment, and abuse. At their church, at their country club, at their book groups, people started avoiding them. My mother called me once during this time. She was sobbing so hard I could barely understand her. "How could you do this to us?" She wailed. "You've ruined our lives. Everyone hates us now. Is this what you wanted? To destroy your own family?" "No, Mom," I said tiredly. "I wanted a family that loved me. Since I couldn't have that, I settled for protecting myself and my son." "You destroyed yourselves. I just stopped covering for you." She hung up on me. But they weren't done yet. In what I can only describe as a final desperate attempt to regain control, my parents hired a lawyer and filed for grandparents' rights to visitation with Mason. The petition claimed I was alienating Mason from his family, denying him a relationship with his grandparents, and emotionally damaging him by keeping him away from his relatives. When I got the court papers, I actually laughed. It was so absurd, so typically manipulative, that I couldn't help it. "They just handed us our case," Chloe said when I showed her the papers. "We're going to eviscerate them in court." The hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks later. Chloe and I prepared meticulously. We had Mason speak with a child psychologist who could testify about his mental state and his actual feelings about his grandparents. We gathered more testimony from family members. We organized all our evidence into a clear, devastating timeline. The day of the hearing, I wore my best suit and held my head high. My parents arrived with their lawyer, both of them looking smaller somehow, older. Jill was there too, looking haggard and angry. The judge was a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and no patience for nonsense. She listened as my parents' lawyer painted me as a vindictive daughter who was using my son as a weapon in a family dispute. Then it was our turn. Chloe was magnificent. She presented evidence of every instance of neglect and emotional abuse my parents had shown toward Mason. She showed texts where they'd refused to attend his birthday parties, screenshots of family photos they'd posted where Mason was deliberately excluded, and testimony from Mason's school about how he'd been treated at family events. Then she brought up the restaurant incident, with witness statements from Uncle Gary, Aunt Denise, and even the waiter who'd served us that night. "Your Honor," Chloe said clearly, "these people didn't want a relationship with Mason when they had one. They ignored him, dismissed him, and publicly humiliated him. They only want access to him now as a way to continue controlling and punishing my client for daring to set boundaries." She presented the false CPS report, with documentation showing it came from Jill's IP address. She showed the harassment, the social media campaign, the threatening messages. And then, in her final blow, she presented something I'd forgotten about: the letter. I'd found it months ago while looking for some old documents. It was a letter my mother had written to my father when she was pregnant with me, found tucked in a box of old papers. In it, she'd complained about the pregnancy, saying I was an accident, that she didn't want another child, that I was going to ruin their plans. My father had kept it for some reason, and somehow it had ended up in a box of things they'd given me years ago. Chloe read portions of it aloud in court. My mother went white, then red, then white again. "These petitioners have never shown genuine love or care for their grandson," Chloe concluded. "They've only weaponized the court system to further their harassment of my client. We request that not only be their petition denied, but that a restraining order be put in place to protect Linda and Mason from further abuse." The judge reviewed all the evidence in silence for what felt like hours. Finally, she looked up. "I've seen a lot of family cases in my time on the bench," she said slowly. "But I have to say, this is one of the more disturbing ones. It's clear to me that the petitioners are not acting in the best interest of the child. They're acting in their own interest, attempting to use this court and this child as tools to punish someone who stood up to them. She looked at my parents. Your petition for grandparents' visitation is denied. Furthermore, I'm issuing a restraining order barring you and your daughter Jill from any contact with Linda or Mason for a period of 3 years. If you attempt to violate this order, you will face criminal charges. This court does not take kindly to people who weaponize the legal system and child protective services for personal vendettas. My mother burst into tears. My father sat frozen. Jill started screaming about how unfair it was until the bailiff told her to be quiet. I felt Mason's hand slip into mine. He'd been allowed to sit in the courtroom for the judge's decision. I looked down at him, and he gave me a small, brave smile. We'd won. The next few weeks were strange. Quiet in a way my life hadn't been in years. No angry calls, no threatening texts, no surprise visits. Just peace. Doug kept his promise. He filed for divorce from Jill and fought for custody of his kids. He used the evidence I'd gathered to show the court that Jill was financially and emotionally unstable. Last I heard, he'd been granted primary custody with Jill getting supervised visitation. My extended family rallied around me in ways I'd never expected. Uncle Gary and Aunt Denise became like second parents to Mason. Cousins I'd barely spoken to in years reached out to reconnect. Even strangers from the parenting forum sent me messages of support. But I knew I couldn't stay in Chicago. There were too many memories, too many connections to a past I needed to leave behind. The house I was living in, the house I'd bought with my own money but that still felt tied to all those years of pain, needed to go. I put it on the market and got an offer within a week. Mason and I packed up our lives and moved to Portland, Oregon. A fresh start, a new city, a place where nobody knew our story or our history. I got a job with a tech company that valued my skills and treated me with respect. Mason enrolled in a new school where he thrived. We made new friends, explored new neighborhoods, started building a life that was truly ours. 6 months after we moved, Mason and I went camping in the Cascade Mountains. We set up our tent near a lake, built a campfire, and sat together watching the stars come out. "Mom," Mason said, leaning against me, "you're my hero. You know that, right?" I wrapped my arm around him, feeling the warmth of the fire on my face and the cool night air on my back. For the first time in my entire life, I felt at peace. Not because I'd gotten revenge, though there was some satisfaction in that, but because I'd finally chosen myself and my son over people who didn't deserve our love. "You're mine too, buddy," I said, kissing the top of his head. I thought about my parents sometimes, about Jill. I heard through the family grapevine that they'd become increasingly isolated, that my parents' friends had mostly abandoned them, that Jill was working minimum wage jobs and living in a small apartment alone. Part of me felt sad about it, but mostly, I felt nothing. They'd made their choices. They'd chosen favoritism, manipulation, and cruelty. And in the end, those choices had cost them everything that mattered. I'd made different choices. I'd chosen dignity, self-respect, and the well-being of my child. And those choices had given me everything I'd ever wanted. A year after we moved to Portland, I met someone. His name was James, and he was kind, patient, and genuinely interested in being a father figure to Mason. We took things slow, but for the first time, I was in a relationship built on mutual respect and actual love. Mason started playing soccer and discovered he was good at it. He made friends easily in Portland, and I watched him blossom into a confident, happy kid who knew his worth. I went to therapy and worked through the years of manipulation and emotional abuse. I learned about narcissistic family systems, about scapegoating, about how children of narcissists often spend their whole lives seeking approval they'll never receive. I learned that it was okay to walk away, that blood doesn't obligate you to accept abuse. Sometimes I still got messages. Anonymous accounts on social media claiming I was a terrible daughter, a heartless person. I knew it was Jill or my parents, still trying to hurt me from afar. I blocked them without reading past the first line. They had no power over me anymore. 2 years after leaving Chicago, I received one final message. It was from my mother's phone, but the area code showed it was from a hospital. My mother had suffered a stroke. It was my father calling, his voice weak and old in a way I'd never heard before. "Linda," he said, "your mother is asking for you. Please. I know we don't deserve it, but please come." I sat with the phone in my hand for a long time. Mason was at soccer practice. James was at work. I was alone in our bright, cheerful kitchen in our Portland home, listening to my father beg. The old Linda would have gone. Would have dropped everything, spent money she couldn't afford on a last-minute flight, rushed to her mother's bedside, hoping that maybe, finally, this would be the moment they'd see her value. That maybe a near-death experience would transform them into the parents she'd always wanted. But I wasn't that Linda anymore. "I'm sorry she's sick," I said carefully. "I hope she recovers. But I won't be coming." "How can you be so cold?" my father asked, and there was genuine bewilderment in his voice. "She's your mother." "She was never a mother to me," I said simply. She was someone who gave birth to me and then spent my entire life making me feel worthless. I hope she gets better, Dad. I really do. But I'm not coming. I hung up before he could respond. And I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. My mother survived the stroke. She recovered almost completely according to the family updates I heard through Uncle Gary. And life went on. Their life in Chicago, our life in Portland, separate and distinct. 3 years after we left, Mason graduated 8th grade with honors. The whole ceremony, I thought about that night at Bellinate, about the basket of bread rolls, about how close I'd come to letting my family destroy my son's spirit the way they'd tried to destroy mine. After the ceremony, Mason ran up to me with his diploma, his face glowing with pride. James was there, cheering just as loudly as I was. Uncle Gary and Aunt Denise had flown out for the occasion. This was our family now. People who chose to love us, who celebrated our successes, who showed up when it mattered. I'm so proud of you, I told Mason, hugging him tight. I know, Mom, he said, grinning. You tell me like every day. Well, it's true every day. That night, James made a special dinner to celebrate. As we sat around our dining room table, laughing and talking and enjoying each other's company, I realized something profound. I'd spent 32 years of my life trying to earn love from people who were incapable of giving it, and in doing so, I'd almost missed out on the real love that was waiting for me. The love of a son who saw me as a hero, the love of a partner who treated me as an equal, the love of extended family who valued me for who I was, the love of friends who supported me unconditionally. I thought about the woman I'd been that night at the restaurant, trembling with rage and hurt, finally saying enough. I was grateful to her. She'd been brave when it mattered most. People always ask me if I regret cutting off my family, if I miss them, if I ever think about reconciling. The truth is complicated. I miss the idea of them. I miss the parents I wish I'd had, the sister I deserved, but I don't miss the reality of who they actually were. I don't miss the constant anxiety, the walking on eggshells, the never being good enough. I don't miss watching my son be treated as less than. And reconciliation? That would require them to change fundamentally as people, to acknowledge what they did and take real responsibility. Based on everything I know about narcissistic family systems and the psychology of people like my parents and Jill, that's never going to happen. They still believe they're the victims in this story. So no regrets. Only relief and gratitude for the life I've built. Last month, I got a letter in the mail. It had been forwarded from my old address in Chicago, and the return address was my parents' house. Inside was a single page, my mother's handwriting, shaky but legible. Linda, it read, I'm writing to tell you that your sister is engaged again. We're having a small celebration, and thought you might want to know. It's not too late to rebuild our family. We're willing to forgive you if you're ready to apologize and move forward. Love, Mother. I read it twice, then handed it to James. He read it and shook his head in disbelief. They still don't get it, he said. They never will. I thought about responding, about trying one more time to make them understand. But what was the point? I'd said everything I needed to say 3 years ago. Anything more would just be reopening wounds that had finally healed. Instead, I did something I'd learned in therapy. I wrote a letter I'd never send. I wrote down all my thoughts, all my feelings, everything I'd ever wanted to say to them. Then I took it to the fire pit in our backyard and burned it, watching the paper curl and blacken and turn to ash. Mason came outside and stood beside me. Was that from Grandma? I'd never hidden the truth from him. He knew everything, age-appropriately explained, about why we'd left Chicago and why we didn't see my parents anymore. Yeah, I said. He asked. I put my arm around him and watched the last bits of paper turn to nothing. Yeah, baby, I'm okay. Better than okay, actually. And it was true. The girl who desperately sought her parents' approval was gone. The woman who'd let herself be used and diminished was gone. In their place was someone stronger, someone who knew her worth, someone who'd learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away. I built a successful career. I raised a remarkable son. I found real love and real family. I created a life full of respect, boundaries, and genuine affection. And I did it all without them. That's not revenge. That's victory. The restraining order expired after 3 years, but I never heard from them again. Maybe they'd finally accepted that I was gone. Maybe they'd found new targets for their manipulation. Or maybe, just maybe, they'd done some reflection and realized what they'd lost. I'd never know, and I was okay with that. 5 years after we left Chicago, Mason got accepted to Stanford, full scholarship for academics and soccer. When he opened the acceptance letter, he cried, happy tears, and so did I. None of this would have happened if we'd stayed, he said, if you hadn't stood up for us that night. We stood up for each other, I corrected him. We're a team, remember? Always, he agreed. I think about that night at Bellinate sometimes, how everything could have gone differently. I could have swallowed my pride, ordered Mason some breadsticks, paid for everyone's meals like I'd done dozens of times before. I could have kept the peace, kept trying to earn their love, kept sacrificing my dignity and my son's well-being for the illusion of family. But I didn't. I chose differently. And that choice changed everything. To anyone reading this who's in a similar situation, who's being used and manipulated and told they're wrong for wanting to be treated with basic respect, I want you to know something. You're not crazy. You're not selfish. You're not a bad daughter or son or sibling. You're a person who deserves love, respect, and kindness. And sometimes, getting those things means walking away from the people who refuse to give them to you, even if those people are family, especially if those people are family. It won't be easy. There will be people who judge you, who tell you that family is everything, who say you should forgive and forget. There will be moments when you doubt yourself, when you feel guilty, when you wonder if you made the right choice. But on the other side of that pain is peace. Real, genuine peace. The kind that comes from knowing you value yourself enough to demand better. The kind that comes from building a life based on mutual respect rather than obligation and guilt. I'm not the same woman who walked into that restaurant 5 years ago. I'm stronger now, wiser, happier, and most importantly, I'm free. Free from the constant anxiety of trying to please people who would never be pleased. Free from the exhausting work of managing other people's emotions while neglecting my own. Free from the prison of a family system built on favoritism, manipulation, and conditional love. Mason is thriving. James and I got married last year in a small ceremony on the Oregon coast. Uncle Gary walked me down the aisle. My chosen family, my real family, surrounded us with love and support. And somewhere in Chicago, my parents and Jill continue their lives without me. I don't wish them harm. I don't spend my time thinking about them or plotting further revenge. I simply don't think about them much at all anymore. That's the thing about healing. Eventually, the people who hurt you stop taking up space in your head and your heart. They become part of your past, a chapter that's closed, a story that shaped you but doesn't define you. I am defined by my resilience, by my capacity for love, by my commitment to breaking cycles of toxicity and building something better. I am defined by the life I've created, the child I've raised, the boundaries I've maintained, and the peace I've found. The girl who desperately wanted her parents' love is still inside me somewhere. She pops up occasionally, wondering if things could have been different, if she'd been different. But I'm kind to her now. I tell her it was never about her, that she was always enough, that she deserved better. And the woman I've become, the one who knows her worth and won't settle for less, she's the one in charge now. She's the one who makes the decisions, who protects my son, who chooses love and respect over obligation and guilt. If my story resonates with you, if you see yourself in my struggles, please know this. You can't change other people. You can't make them see your value or appreciate your sacrifices or suddenly become the family you deserve. All you can control is yourself, your choices, your boundaries. Choose yourself. Choose your peace. Choose your children if you have them. Choose a life where you're valued and respected, even if that means leaving behind people you once loved. It's the hardest choice you'll ever make, and it's the best one too. As I write this, I'm sitting on my porch in Portland, watching the sunset. Mason is packing for his first year at Stanford. James is grilling dinner. Uncle Gary and Aunt Denise are visiting next week. My life is full of love, laughter, and genuine connection. And I earned every bit of it by finally believing I was worth fighting for. That night at Bellinate, when I stood up and walked away, I wasn't just leaving a restaurant. I was leaving behind everything that had ever made me feel small, unworthy, and invisible. I walked toward myself, toward my son, toward a future I was going to build with my own hands, and I've never looked back.